In 1973, audiences across America lined up around city blocks, waiting in the rain and the cold to see a movie that would change cinema forever. Inside the theaters, people were fainting. Some vomited. Others ran out of the auditorium in sheer terror, clutching their rosaries. The movie was The Exorcist. For decades, it has been hailed as the scariest movie ever made. But the true terror of The Exorcist isn't the spinning head, the green vomit, or the Hollywood special effects. The true terror lies in the fact that the story wasn't just a screenplay. It was based on a real boy, a real family, and a real battle against something that science could not explain and doctors could not cure. Welcome back. Tonight, we are going to open the case file of 1949. We are going to look past the movie screen and into the dark bedroom of a 13-year-old boy in Cottage City, Maryland. A boy known to the world only by the pseudonym Roland Doe. This is the story of the frantic mother, the desperate priests, and the weeks of hell that unfolded in a hospital room in St. Louis. This is the true story behind The Exorcist. To understand the horror, we have to go back to January of 1949. The world was rebuilding after the Second World War. Life in the suburbs of Maryland was quiet, predictable, and safe. Roland was an only child, described by neighbors as quiet and introverted. He spent a lot of time with the adults in his family, particularly his Aunt Harriet. Harriet was a spiritualist. She wasn't just interested in church on Sundays. She was fascinated by the other side. She taught young Roland how to use a Ouija board. She told him that it was a way to communicate with the dead, a harmless game to speak to those we've lost. But in January of 1949, Aunt Harriet died. Roland was devastated. He had lost his best friend and his confidant. In his grief, the boy returned to the Ouija board. He sat alone in his room, fingers on the planchette, calling out into the silence. He wanted to talk to Harriet. It began in the walls. A dry, rhythmic scratching sound, like rat claws digging through the plaster. The family assumed it was rodents. They called exterminators. They set traps, but there were no rats. The scratching moved. It went from the walls to the floorboards, and then, impossibly, into the mattress of Roland's bed. It wasn't just a sound anymore. The bed began to vibrate. At first, it was a subtle trembling, but soon it became violent. The heavy furniture would shake so hard that Roland couldn't sleep. His parents were terrified. They were logical people. They didn't believe in ghosts. But how do you explain a picture of Jesus on the wall, shaking violently while the rest of the room is still? How do you explain a heavy armchair sliding across the floor on its own, as if pushed by invisible hands? The activity escalated quickly. It wasn't just mischievous. It was aggressive. At night, Roland would scream out in pain. When his mother turned on the lights, she would find angry red welts appearing on his skin. Scratches that looked like they were made by claws, blooming on his flesh before their eyes. Desperate for answers, the family turned to medicine. They took Roland to the family doctor. They went to specialists at Georgetown University Hospital. They ran tests, physical exams, psychological evaluations. The doctors were baffled. Physically, the boy was healthy. Mentally, he seemed frightened, but sane. There was no medical explanation for the welt, the shaking bed, or the guttural noises the boy had started making. Medicine had failed them. With nowhere left to turn, the family looked to the church. They were Lutheran, so they called their local minister, Reverend Schultz. Schultz was a man of faith, but he was also a skeptic. He decided to spend a night in the house to observe the boy. That night changed everything. Schultz watched as the boy's bed shook violently. He watched as a heavy vase flew across the room and shattered against the wall. But the most chilling moment came when the minister tried to pray. As he recited the Lord's Prayer, the scratching sounds became deafening, drowning out his voice. He realized then that this was beyond his capability. He told the parents, "You need to see a Catholic priest." The family moved Roland to St. Louis, Missouri, where they had relatives. They hoped a change of scenery would stop the activity. They were wrong. The entity followed them. In St. Louis, the case was handed over to the Jesuits. Father William Bowdern, a pastor at St. Francis Xavier College Church, was assigned to the case. He was assisted by Father Raymond Bishop and a younger priest, Father Walter Halloran. These men were not superstitious fanatics. They were academics. They approached this with caution. Father Bishop began keeping a detailed diary of the events. It is from this diary that we know exactly what happened in that room. The exorcism began in March of 1949. It didn't take place in a single night like in the movies. It was a war of attrition that lasted for weeks. They moved Roland to a room in the Alexian Brothers Hospital. The priests would arrive in the evening, ready to do battle until dawn. The transformation in Roland was terrifying. During the day, he was a normal, quiet teenager. He would read comic books, play cards, and talk politely to the nurses. But as soon as the sun went down and the priests began the prayers of the Roman ritual, the boy would vanish. His face would contort into a mask of pure hatred. His voice, normally soft, would drop an octave, becoming a guttural growl that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. He would spit at the priests with unnatural accuracy. He would curse them in languages he had never studied: Latin, Greek, and French. He knew things he couldn't possibly know. He knew the private sins of the priests in the room. He would taunt them, mocking their faith, their families, and their fears. The physical strength of the boy was impossible. It often took 4 or 5 grown men doctors, attendants, and the priests just to hold down this 90-pound boy. On one occasion, Roland broke free from his restraints. He reached under his pillow, pulled out a metal bed spring he had torn loose, and slashed Father Halloran's arm from the elbow to the wrist. The scar would remain with the priest for the rest of his life. But the most disturbing phenomena was the writing on the skin. This was something the movie never fully explored, but it was the most documented part of the real case. When the priests would command the demon to leave, words would appear on Roland's chest, stomach, and legs. They weren't scratched in. They appeared as raised red welts, like hives, forming clear letters. The word H-E-L-L appeared on his chest. The word spite appeared on his stomach. Sometimes, marks that looked like satanic symbols or Roman numerals would form on his thighs. The priests would photograph these marks, terrified by the intelligent malice they displayed. The nights were long and grueling. The room would turn freezing cold, even with the heating on. A foul stench, like sulfur and rotting meat, would fill the air, making everyone gag. The boy would vomit, but not the green pea soup from the movie. It was just vile, excessive fluid that seemed impossible for one human stomach to hold. By Meadleprel, everyone was exhausted. Father Bowdern was fasting and praying constantly, losing weight and strength. The boy was deteriorating. It felt like the entity was winning. The demon claimed it would never leave. It claimed Roland belonged to him. On the night of April 18th, 1949, the battle reached its climax. It was the Monday after Easter. Father Bowdern came into the room, determined. He had a new strategy. He demanded that the demon reveal its name. In the rituals of exorcism, knowing the name of the demon gives the exorcist power over it. The boy thrashed violently. The voice screamed, "I am Legion." But Bowdern did not stop. He pressed a crucifix to the boy's chest and called upon Saint Michael, the archangel. He prayed for the warrior angel who cast Lucifer out of heaven to enter this room and fight for Roland's soul. Suddenly, a new voice came from the boy's mouth. It wasn't the guttural, demonic growl, and it wasn't Roland's own voice. It was a commanding, powerful, masculine voice that boomed through the room. The voice spoke only one word, Dominus, the Latin word for Lord. At that moment, a brilliant light was reported by some in the room, though others described it as a feeling of immense pressure lifting. A sound like a thunderclap or a gunshot echoed through the hospital wing. And then, silence. Roland's body went to limp. The contortions stopped. The growling ceased. He opened his eyes and looked around the room, confused. He looked at the exhausted priests, the restraints on his wrists, and asked, simply, "Where am I?" He remembered nothing of the last few weeks. He remembered the grandmother the Ouija board, and then waking up here. The words on his skin had faded. The feeling of dread in the room was gone. The next day, Roland ate a full breakfast. He was himself again. The Jesuits, true to their disciplined nature, packed up their things and left. They were ordered to never speak of this again. The diary was locked away. Roland and his family moved away from St. Louis, back to the East Coast, desperate to bury the past. They never gave interviews. They never sought fame. Roland grew up, got married, had children and grandchildren, and lived a completely normal life until his death in 2020. He never spoke publicly about what happened to him in 1949. But the story couldn't be contained. A small article appeared in the Washington Post in August of 1949. Years later, a student at Georgetown University named William Peter Blatty heard about the case. He couldn't get it out of his head. He tracked down the diary. He spoke to the priests. And he wrote the book that became the movie. So, what really happened in that room? Skeptics today will tell you it was mental illness. They will say it was Tourette's syndrome, schizophrenia, or a dissociative identity disorder caused by trauma. They will say the moving furniture was a trick. The words on the skin were self-inflicted, and perhaps, for some of it, they are right. But the doctors of 1949 found no illness. The witnesses were not hysterical family members. They were trained medical professionals and skeptical academics. And the scar on Father Halloran's arm was very, very real. The story of Roland Doe reminds us that there are doors in this world that should remain shut. It reminds us that when we stare into the abyss, sometimes something stares back. But the question that lingers in the dark corners of our minds is simple. If the devil is real enough to possess a child, then God must be real enough to save him. Or is it the other way around? Tonight, before you go to sleep, take a look around your room. Listen to the settling of the house. Is that just the wind outside? Or is it a scratching in the walls?